Chapter 11. Breaking in Old Outlaw. After the shipping was over, my job was to ride the range and brand any unbranded animal I might find, and I branded quite a few yearling and a few 2-year-olds that had been missed in the roundup. I saw that the boys detailed to cut ice kept the water holes open and the line riders were on the jobs, and kept the fences in good shape and gathered poor cattle that needed to be fed. You worked in North Dakota and I in South Dakota, as the state line cut Morris and Company in two. About the 15th of December, winter set in the good old-fashioned Dakota way. It had frozen and snowed for a month, but would warm up and melt in a few days. But on or about the time of blizzard drifted cattle in from the north to the prairie to the Badlands, where they found protection in the way of deep canyons and timber-high bluffs and mountains. We could do nothing until the storm subsided. Then I had to go and get all the boys together and take a chuck wagon, bed, feed wagon, and push the cattle out of the southwest corner. We really suffered on that trip. There were 14 men in the bunch. The only winter I could remember suffering so much was from the cold, was the winter Joe Beckham was killed in Stutter's line camp. That was a beastly winter in Texas. One man in my group was named Jack Brown. He had come there from El Paso in July, and had been on the north side of the range all the time in line camp until all his part was vacated and he needed other work. He joined the herd to bring them back, and somehow got lost from the men while gathering the cattle. He did not find the wagon until after he had frozen to death. His faithful horse brought him in frozen to a block of ice in the morning after he had got lost. His horse was standing at the feed wagon, and poor old Jack was sitting straight up with the bridle reins in his hand, one hand clutched over the saddle horn. Before we got back off that miserable trip, one man's horse slipped and fell to his right foot hung in the stirrup and twisted his knee out of joint. He was dragged and kicked almost to death before his foot came loose. Several of the men had their feet and ears frozen. But such is the life of a cowboy, and he might expect anything, and it is not in keeping with his character to grumble. By the time he returned to the ranch, Mrs. Hardy had gone to Chicago to spend the winter months with her mother. The cook had gone off to spend his accumulated wealth, for old John was thirsty. John had been taking a liking to me. When the boys would tease him about my being the runt of the ranch, he would tell them I could ride any damn horse on the entire Indian reservation. I always helped John with the dishes, and I shared my bed with him since he got none. Old John was a good blacksmith, so when Mr. Hardy wanted me to go along with the haying outfit, I told John to take the job, that I would be at the hay camp every few days to see about him. Everything was running nicely when one day at noon, as the boys were catching up on their teams, Ben caught out a span of brown Hamilton horses, and that had been brought for saddle horses. As Ben was a good rider, and very strong, he was given these two half-broken horses to work. While he was bridling one of them, the other broke loose and ran off. Of course, his mate followed, and he was taking Ben right along with him. He was going so fast, Ben, I suppose, thought he must be flying, for he only hit the ground once as the horse broke away from to follow his mate. The catch rope was tied to one end of the horse's neck, the other end is loose, and had caught Ben's spur and was holding fast, making him slide with him. The horse wrangler was a quick pursuit. The rope came off the spur after Ben had been taken about half a mile from camp. He had to come back to camp to let his spirited team go for the day. I think Ben found he didn't need spurs to ride a moving machine, for the next time I went to camp, I saw his spurs in old John's toolbox. The next morning I saw two horses grazing near the south side of the pasture, and noticed that they kept raising their heads, looking towards the river, as though they were looking for something. I suppose they were mustangs or Indian horses. I'd seen them on the hilltop, and I knew they had not seen me. I went to the old L7 ranch headquarters that day for lunch, and while there learned about the horses getting away from the hay camp. I told Mrs. Adams, who lived there, I was sure I had seen a runaway horses that morning, and I would get them that evening and take them to the hay camp that night. I told her that if anyone came hunting for them, tell them I would follow the horses until I caught them. The old L7 headquarters, where Mr. and Mrs. Adams lived, was in distance only long enough for Byrd Rose to get all his cattle rounded up and shipped out as the C7 had taken over. I left right after I ate and rode straight to the horses. The wind was blowing just right for them to scent me, and I saw them coming out of a ravine, looking my direction, and they started running. I was almost a mile from them when they disappeared over a ridge. I crossed the ravine and saw them making for the river, the very place I wanted them to go. I managed to get the wind of them, and I kept out of sight from them, never exposing my horse to their view. When they got to the water, they waded downstream and vanished behind the high banks of the river. But they had gone through a water gap in the river into a four-section pasture. I thought I had them where I could handle them, or at least could run them down by keeping in sight of them, cutting them off from the gap in the fence of the river. When I came to the gap, I stopped and dismounted in the shade of some cottonwood trees and pulled my saddle off from my horse and let it rest and cool before making another run for them. I was looking down the river and happened to see the head of one of the horses appear above the high bank of the river. He showed his long, slender neck above the bank, and I could see the heads of the other horses behind him. They just stood there for several minutes looking back the way they had come. Then they disappeared by going back the way they had come to the riverbed. I mounted and made a dash to where I had seen them, being careful not to get where they could see me from the riverbed. When I was near the place they had first shown their heads, I dismounted and crept up the bank and peeped over. I saw the horses just entering the thick grove of timber on the other side of the river. I have never seen a horse before use such diligence and cunning judgment. I rode on down the river where I could cross and get the timber on the horses and keep the windward side of them. I left my horse tied in a thick clump of bushes and crept up on foot within a few yards of them before they saw me, and before they could get away. I had caught the end of a lariat, but could not hold the horse as he was bound to follow his mate, though he was the leader of the two. I made it back to my horse and gave chase until I saw they were going into a corner of the pasture. I pulled my horse up a little and rode to a rise where I could watch them see what defense they would travel. I was sure they would stay near one of the fences. They trotted up and down fence both ways a time or two until I saw they were going due north. I got my rope and made a run to head them off. As the pasture passed between the fence and me, I threw my rope and the noose settled over his head. I knew the race had ended, but he hit the end of the rope so hard that he jerked my saddle horse down and dragged the little creature for several yards. I knew the big brown was a caught horse, for I had a strong rope in the saddle that he could not break. He soon stopped and turned his head to me, and I knew I had him. I slipped the bridle from my horse and put it on the big brown and led him up. Took the noose from over his head and tied it in my bridle reins, then slipped the saddle from the gentle horse, and I put it on the one I just hot, powerful brown stallion. I knew I would call him Old Outlaw. His mate had stopped and was watching the performance. I soon had the big brown horse saddled and ready for traveling. I blindfolded him and took my seat. He bucked and bellowed for several minutes while I did my best to cut him in two with spurs and skirt. Finally, he broke into a run and gave me the fastest ride I've ever taken for a mile or more before I could rein him in. I was near the river when he stopped running, and I made straight for the sandbar to train him on, for I wanted a good soft spot in which to fall providing I had to fall. I soon taught that noble beast who was his master. In 1 hour he would stand still for me to get on him and walk or trot off, and I could handle him with ease with the bridle bits. I found the other two horses near where I'd left them. I drove them to a corner of the pasture and caught them up as the runaway had a rope on him. Anyway, I wanted to be near his mate, which I led when I got him to the corner. The horse I had turned loose was not hard to catch. I mounted and struck out for the hay camp about 6 o'clock that evening, a distance of 38 miles. I got in around 11 that night. I rode up to camp and called out for the gainer. I told him I had his runaways. While I ate, I had to tell him just how I caught the horses. I asked him if he needed a big brown horse to work. He told me he didn't, that if I wanted to get my full neck broke, I could keep him for my own use. He had never said he wouldn't have worked the horse, but nobody on the ranch could ride him, and he had run away from the hay camp last fall. That horse was a plumb devil, but a real saddle horse that I could ride as far as any man can be ridden in a day, but he was always mean to pitch. Mr. Hardy was surprised to see me ride up the next morning leading one horse astride the other. He gave me a raise, but Old Outlaw fell a few days later and broke my leg while pitching. I found a wild steer that was about 9 years old. I wanted to put it in the north side of the railroad out of the Badlands, so we could get him when shipping time came in. But the steer refused to leave his old range that had saved him from the slaughter pen for several years. He was a big, old, mossy-headed fellow that had been seen many times, but had never been driven beyond the range. I knew that my horse and I could catch him, and that was all the chance I had in getting him out. I also knew to blindfold him by putting sticks in his eyes, for that was the only way he would leave his old haunts alive. I decided to take a chance on my horse throwing him and holding him until I could tie the critter down. So, cinching my saddle good and tight, I made a dash for him as he curled his tail and made for the nearest timber where he would stand off a man by making fight with his long, keen horns. I had found him in an open glade feeding with the other cattle that could be easily driven. The old steer wore an L7 brand that Byrd, Rose, and Ed Lemon once had. He was one of the largest steers I had ever seen. He must have weighed close to 2,200 pounds. So my brown horse would stay on the ground and hold what he would when the old fellow was near the timbers. My rope tightened around his long horns, and as soon as Outlaw felt the steer's weight on the rope, he became unruly and unmanageable, trying to run and pitch at the same time. He got jerked down, catching my right foot beneath him and breaking my ankle. He jerked me loose and ran past the old steer, breaking the rope as he hit the end of it at full speed, and keeping it up as far as he could see. He left me to the mercy of the steer, who watched me for a second or two and made for the middle of the thick timber. I crawled to a fallen tree and placed my foot in the fork of a limb and pulled off my boot by pulling it backwards on it. Then I cut some young ash sprouts about the size of my thumb and split them. Taking my top shirt, splintered and bound my leg as best as I could, and also hung my boot onto my belt by running the belt through the ears of my boot. Then I began to look for something to make me a crutch or two from. I did not aim to sit there and petrify, nor did I want to stay around where they bury you in shallow graves with nothing but a saddle blanket. Finally, I found what I needed. Then I started for Grand River, which was about 9 miles away. The country was very rough, and it was hard traveling, especially after it grew dark. My leg hurt me something fierce at times as I stumbled along. Sometime that night I got to the river near old Tom Fly's cabin and wigwams. I knew he might help me. I could hire them to take me to Little Eagle, the nearest Indian agency, and then I could get a doctor there. I could stay there until I could walk again. I got the squaw up, and she woke her boy. I bargained with them to take me to the doctor. I gave them $10 and my silver-mounted spurs, which were worth 10. They had a top buggy, so the old squaw was to take me to Little Eagle, and the boy was to get my horse and saddle and take them there to the ranch. I also gave them my slicker, providing he found the horse that day. I got to the doctor the next evening about 2:30. My leg was already turning black. The doctor bathed it in something and packed my foot and leg in a tub of ice up to my knee and buckled me to a chair. Then is when I suffered and cursed myself, the doctor, and the steer, not to mention that I called that crazy horse. But by freezing my leg, the doctor had calmed the fever and saved my foot. While on the reservation, I rode off to Myrtle Ashley and got several replies. There were some 500 children going to school there and several white children. What time I wasn't telling stories and singing to the children, I stayed pretty close to my room. They would come to me in bunches and say, "Cowboy, sing!" Then I was able to move about and played with them. They would come up to me and say, "Cowboy, chase us! Cowboy, chase!" When I made a move towards them, they would scream and run in all directions. On going back to the ranch, I soon fitted my old job out again. It was time to gather cattle. Two of my boys had folks living only a few miles from the west side of the C7 pasture next to Lemon, and they told me that when we got up that way, we would all go over the line and have a good old country dance. I didn't care to go, but I felt I should. I had to go 16 miles from where the wagon was to that dance. We'd not start until after dark. I rode an old horse that opened all the gates on the road and running through them by knocking them down. One of the boys had been into town that day for whiskey. I'd send for a gallon of Old John because he threatened to leave if he didn't get his red-eye. He wanted to go to the dance, but by the time we were ready to go, he was too drunk to stay on his horse. After he fell off the third time, he gave up and went to bed. Everyone for miles around went to the dance. All the boys rushed into the house and got their names on the floor manager's book and were stepping to the ladies' Jake. I hung back. I never had been a good dancer. I liked music and liked to see others have a good time. I even played the fiddle a few tunes. Then, while I was out in the yard with some cowboys, a young lady stepped up to me and spoke and shook my hand as though she had always known me. I thought she had mistaken me for someone else by her friendliness. She linked her arm in mine and started for the door with me. She insisted that I dance with her. She took my hat and put it away. I really felt like a darn fool. She led me right into the middle of the dance floor, and I turned red as fire. She faced the ladies on one side of the room and said, "Ladies, this is Byrd Cochrain from Texas. He works on the C7 ranch. He is not afraid of wild cattle or pitching horses or bad men, but he needs a little coaxing where women are concerned." This brought a big laugh. The boys asked me if I was going to faint or dance. I got carried high off for a few minutes. Then the bookkeeper called a free-for-all waltz, and the fiddler started the music. My new lady friend told me this was my dance with her. That was the longest waltz I've ever staggered through. That gal hugged me close, and I began to look for the door. She said that she couldn't dance unless her partner was close to her. She rested her pretty head on my shoulder all through the dance and talked and talked. I longed for the wagon and Old John. When the waltz was ended, she led me to a seat, and I told her to sit down. But she told me to sit first. There was only room for one, but she insisted that I sit first. I did, and she plopped right down on my lap. She put her arms around my neck and chatted and laughed and patted my cheeks, chuckled me under the chin, and giggled. I sure was looking around for the door. I couldn't find my hat. Finally, someone came and claimed her for the next dance. She planted a kiss on my head before she left, and everyone laughed. She really made a monkey out of me. I believe her name was Lillian Ross. I tried to find my hat, but it was gone. A girl named Margaret Smoot got me next time, and I had to dance with her before I left. I finished that set and left there like a midnight dream. The others stayed and danced all night. It was about 8 in the morning before they came back to the camp. I lived through that first winter in Dakota somehow. March came at last. It brought with it those strong Chinook winds that chilled me to the bone. The wind blew so hard one could scarcely keep a hat on. The snows began to melt and the streams began to flow with sparkling clear water. The ground became spongy and would have been boggy if it hadn't been for such turf of grass which stays rich and nourishing all winter. Its stems and blades of green were up under the snow, and horses paw the snow to eat the grass. The cattle raw en route through the snow and graze on the south sides of the hills and on top where the snow was blown away, but it gets very thin before spring. It snows a lot in April, but it soon melts, which soaks the earth as it thaws out, and by May the 1st, the prairies look like a wheat field with a fine prospect for a good harvest. The fall grass waving in the breeze is mighty good to see. In May of 1909, the spring roundup started, shaping up the cattle for summer grazing and branding of calves and sleepers, cattle of the nesters and the Indian careless of branding their own stock. And then came a few weeks of rest, or ease when all hands were laid off or given a chance to go to town. For a puncher who has accumulated a few $100s is too independent to make a good hand. After getting the cattle on the range where we wanted them, Mr. Hardy and I rode over the entire Morris holdings. Wayne Moore, Mrs. Hardy's brother, had the job of galloping around the pasture fence that was some 70 miles around it. He had a special horse he rode for this, and when the job was done in a week. During the fire seasons, C7 had a gray team that was never out of the corrals, and the wagon ready loaded with water barrels, and a special-made log chain for dragging out fires. They split the team when they got to the fire, and each man rode a horse on two ends of the chain. Charlie Hardy could work a herd of cattle from 1,000 to 2,000 head out in the open. He would saddle Fraser and say, "Boys, follow me." Then he would go down through the middle of them, cutting them in half, and then cut back to the center to hold them, at which there was a sight to see. During the summer, I spent many hours at the camps of the Sioux. Their camps were scattered along the Grand River. I made the acquaintance of one fine Indian girl who could speak English. Her father was Tom Fly, and was one of the best nighthawks I've ever seen. If he lost a horse, he could tell when and just how he had lost him. He could see in the dark like an owl. His wife was half-breed. I courted the girl for pastime pleasure. Many a ride we took together in that summer of 1909. She was 25 and gifted in relating the war stories of her tribe, which she took great pride in. The Sioux was a kind of tribe prone to boast. She told me many bloodthirsty scenes about the massacre of white people by their people. I heard the story of General Custer, and this was told by an old Hayride Indian warrior. It makes shivers run over me yet to think of how brutal the Indians were. It seems to give me that old warrior much pleasure to see me horrified at his deeds of inhuman cruelty. He told me of the noted chieftain Sitting Bull and his many raids upon the helpless white settlers of the Northwest. Sitting Bull was never conquered. The government finally ordered a reward of $500 for him, dead or alive. One night at a war dance in the Grand River, where the Indian post of Bull Head now stands, one of his own warriors shot and killed him for the money.